Hello, Merry Christmas. I'm Pastor Ted Wilkinson here at Bethany United Church of Christ, and unfortunately we have had to cancel our Christmas Eve service due to the inclement weather that's currently coming down on us and the fact that we've been having heating problems here at the church. That doesn't make for a good combination. Right now it's around, I think last I checked it was 23 degrees outside. You'll probably hear the wind blowing against the walls, but I'm filming this on Friday. I thought I should film it so that we can have some sort of, even if it's a virtual worship, some sort of worship for Christmas Eve. And so since I've written a sermon anyway, I'm going to read it to you now. Anyway, so to start off, our gospel reading is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quilius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and the family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for Mary to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them at the inn. The word of the Lord. Now usually, this is our typical Christmas reading. You'll hear this in most churches on Christmas Eve and Christmas. But usually they also include the story of the shepherds and the angels and the singing of the angels. But I thought for Christmas Eve at least, let's just focus on the birth of Jesus. Let's just focus on this one part of the story. And then tomorrow, Christmas Day, which we're still going to have a service on Christmas Day, hopefully the heat will be working by then. We will focus more on the shepherds. But tonight, let's just talk about Jesus, his birth, and what does this mean, and this first story, this first day, if you will, of Christmas. And when we read this story and we reflect on the story, a lot of things probably come to mind since we hear this every year. And if you're like me, you might have grown up in a church that every year did a nativity play, play with a lot of kids in it. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, All Saints Episcopal in Maryland, and it was a large church, and so we had a lot of kids in our nativity play. They probably brought in as many kids as possible to get as many families there every year. For Christmas Eve, there's a lot of moving parts of this play. I remember having to rehearse a lot for it every year, and there was a pretty rigid hierarchy of the parts in the play and what kids got to play which parts. The youngest kids, usually 7 and under, were all sheep who wore paper grocery bags with cotton balls glued to them, and their only job was to come up with the shepherds when the time came and then just sort of stand there, not really do anything or say anything. The 8 to 10-year-olds usually got the bigger parts, but without speaking roles. They got to play Mary and Joseph, the wise men, the innkeepers, etc. The 11 to 13-year-olds got to be the choir of angels. They would sing, but didn't have any direct lines beside their song. And the older kids, the teenagers, got to do all the speaking roles, like the narrator and the angel that pronounces Jesus' birth. And they got to be the shepherds that would sort of lead the young kids up and then sort of keep them from wandering off to their parents or doing something they weren't supposed to. Now, I grew up in this church. I was there until I went to college, and so I probably played all the roles. I remember being a sheep. I remember a few of them. But the one I remember most was when I was somewhere between 8 and 10, we'll say 8 years old. And I got to play my first part that wasn't a sheep. It was the first innkeeper who turns Joseph and Mary away, and then they go to the second inn. A character that I only realized many years later doesn't exist. It's not in the gospel accounts anywhere. There is no account of them going to multiple inns, so there is no first or second. We assume there was an innkeeper at the inn they were in the story, but there's no actual part that's where they go to an inn and get turned away. Irregardless, I had no lines of dialogue. I was very excited though, because I didn't have to be a sheep, didn't have to wear a paper bag essentially. And everyone but the sheep got to pick out costumes. All Saints had a big closet filled with costumes they probably collected for years. And we sort of got there. Besides Joseph and Mary, there was no set costumes for anyone, so you got to kind of pick what you wanted. And I don't remember what I wore like as a cloak or anything, but I remember I had a fez hat, which I thought looked real cool. My 8-year-old self was just super stylish. So when the time came, Joseph and Mary come up the aisle, and the narrator's reading, and it says, "It comes to the first in," and I popped up from behind the pulpit and pointed them away. And I got a big laugh. I'm not sure, maybe I had a funny look on my face or something. But it's either way, whatever the case was, I was excited to do that. And even though I played all the roles, I had speaking roles later on, and probably played Joseph at some point, and did a lot in that youth group. It was that role that I think back on, that I remember when I think about nativity plays. It was that small role as innkeeper number one. It was a very minor role, a very small one that doesn't exist in the Gospels, but it was a little blessing that meant a lot for me. Now, why am I talking about this? Why am I going on and on about me playing a role in a nativity play that doesn't exist? Well, because of all the things that happen in this story, because of all the things that happen in the story of Jesus' birth, all the miracles leading up to it, the Immaculate Conception, and the angel visiting Mary, and all things will happen after that, the angels talking to the shepherds, and the Magi come in, and all that, all the miracles, and the wise men, and the angels. This oftentimes we get a picture in our head that the night of Jesus' birth is one of constant action, of constant things happening. It was a night filled of excitement, of miracles. This and these people came, and that people came, and all these things are going on. A night filled with all kinds of excitement. But we are given in the gospel accounts very little information about that first Christmas. So we tend to add things in our heads, and our churches tend to add things in order to flesh out the details. Like the nativity play I participated in all those years ago, we probably imagine Joseph and Mary going to multiple places seeking shelter before they have to settle on going to a manger. We imagine what animals might have been in that manger. The gospel doesn't mention any animals besides the sheep that the shepherds have, but we assume that since a manger is where animals go, that there were animals in there with them. We imagine all these extra details because the Gospels give us so little information. Some churches have gone to great lengths creating many extra roles that didn't really exist, such as my innkeeper number one. You might remember from the movie Love Actually, if you've ever seen it. It's many years old now, but all at the climax of the film is at a nativity play that all the kids are in, and all the main characters end up there. But in the recital, there are so many kids that they have to have more roles than are in the gospel. And so at the birth of Jesus, there's also an octopus and a kangaroo and a bunch of extra stuff that didn't really, and then everyone sings Frosty the Snowman. And, they're clearly taking a lot of creative liberties with this story. But despite all that, despite all the sort of embellishment, the story is actually quite short and not a lot of details, as I keep saying. And we aren't given a specific timeline on any of this. We imagine that the shepherds kind of show up right after Jesus was born, and then the Magi show up almost at the same time, but none of that is given for certain. We're not sure of how long it took. It just says they came in haste. But we don't know what that means. They probably didn't want to travel at night, since it was very dangerous to travel at night, so they may have just come the next day. And I like to think that since, Mary had just given birth to a baby and they're already in a manger, it's already a stressful time, I like to think that God gave them a day off. That Mary and Joseph got to spend just like one day with their newborn baby before a bunch of strangers showed up trying to give them gifts and trying to see this newborn. But when it comes to Luke, what he actually tells us about the birth, we are given very little description. We are essentially only told four things in Luke, and they all come in one sentence, the last sentence that I read from our scripture reading. 1, that Jesus is Mary's firstborn son. 2, Mary wrapped Jesus in bands of cloth. 3, Mary laid the baby in a manger. And 4, that there was no place for them at the inn. Just one sentence, that's all the description we get. We've been building up to this birth for a full chapter at this point in Luke, and there's going to be a bunch of stuff after it, but the birth itself gets one sentence in Luke's gospel. And honestly, this sentence leaves us with a lot more questions than we probably had before. Such as this is the town that Joseph is from, because he's going back for this census. Why are they staying at an inn? Shouldn't Joseph have family there? Why aren't they staying with his family, even if it's extended family, like cousins or aunts or whatever? Was Mary, and this leads to a lot of speculation. Maybe Mary wasn't supposed to give birth yet, and Jesus was a premature birth. He was born at 7 or 8 months instead of 9. Maybe Mary went to labor right as they're entering the city of Bethlehem, and they didn't have time to go track down his family, so they just had to find somewhere that they could give birth right there, and then they kind of stayed there because they didn't want to move because she had just given birth. Maybe Joseph's relatives were jerks. I don't know. Maybe they knew that Mary had been pregnant before the marriage and didn't want to welcome her into their house, and so they had to find somewhere else to stay. But whatever the reason, whatever the situation that led up to these events, Luke doesn't tell us, and that's probably because Luke doesn't find them important. See, the Gospels were written at a time when paper was not a plentiful commodity. It was quite expensive. You couldn't just go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy a ream of 1,000 pages. It was very costly to produce and very costly to use, or to buy, excuse me. And so the four Gospels kept their stories sort of down to just the important stories of Jesus' life, the important events, the events that illuminate us into who Jesus is and what his mission was. And they didn't really have time to spend on sort of frivolous things that they might find maybe interesting, but not important to the story, not essential to us understanding who Jesus was. So whatever situation or family drama that led to them being in a manger, to Luke is unimportant. What Luke finds important is that the baby is born healthy and safe, and that Jesus has arrived not with a bang, but on a quiet night surrounded by his family. Though the path to his birth has been filled with what seems like miracle after miracle, big event after big event, the actual birth is seemingly normal. Nothing special about it. We don't hear about an angel helping Mary to deliver the baby. Jesus, the baby, doesn't come out able to speak or anything like that. If we were staying at that inn and we heard that Mary and Joseph had just delivered a baby in the manger and we met them, we would think they're just a normal couple and this is just a normal baby. And we would thought, oh, well, I'm so glad that the baby's healthy, even though it was born in a manger. And then we'd probably never think of them again. Or we might bring it up like, oh yeah, I knew this couple that gave birth in a manger. How crazy is that? But the birth appears in just a few words, even though the gospel has been building up to it this whole time. And we often gloss over it in favor of the other miracles of the Bible. But I bet that even though we today and the gospel writers didn't find this as important a thing as, or obviously the birth is symbolically important and it's important that he was born, but the night itself is sort of glossed over. But I bet when Mary and Joseph reflected on this night, reflected about Jesus' birth, thought about it years down the line, it wasn't necessarily the miracles. They remembered all that stuff, but it wasn't the miracles that they reflected on all the time. It wasn't necessarily the shepherds showing up or the magi showing up that they reflect on. It was that quiet moment, that first day, those first few hours of just Mary and Joseph with their newborn baby, getting to spend time together as a family for the first time, getting to sit there and bask in the glory, and not necessarily the majestic glory, but the glory that all children bring us when they are first born. The true miracles of life are not necessarily angels and magi. They aren't mystical dreams or signs in the sky. They are the everyday experiences that we take for granted and often overlook. While no one would write about these, if someone was to write a biography about you, they might write about the big events of your life, you getting married, you going to college, if you fought in a war, or if you did something that exceeded expectations of people. They would write about all those things, but But oftentimes, when we think about things, when we reflect on things, it is the quiet moments that we share with the ones we love that we think about the most. The meals we share together, the quiet nights just spent watching TV or sitting on the porch. Is in these little moments that we can find real joy and the most important, and are oftentimes the most important parts of life. We would never write these down. Even if we were ourselves to write an autobiography, we would never write these down. If Luke came back and wanted to write the Gospel of Ted, he would never include the story of when I was innkeeper number 1, and yet it's what I think about when I talk about the Nativity. It is these little moments that give our life true joy, that can give our life meaning. And while we may remember the big events, and we probably tell the stories of these big events in our lives more often because they make better stories, is the little moments that can mean the most to us and can have the biggest impact on ourselves. So this Christmas, as we gather together for presents, for eggnog, for dinner and family and friends, we must remember to be thankful for the little things in life, the small miracles we receive every day, those quiet moments with the ones we love. Let us give thanks for those we love and the quiet personal moments we get to spend with them. For that it was a quiet personal moment that started the first Christmas. That first Christmas was just a quiet night of 2 parents and their new baby in a small town in Bethlehem. And with that, I would like to wish you a Merry Christmas. I pray that you will come visit us tomorrow as we do our Christmas Day service. That's not typical for us. We usually do just Christmas Eve, but since it's Sunday, we're doing Christmas Day. So I hope you'll join us there. I hope you have a Merry Christmas, whatever you're doing, and may the love and light of Jesus Christ shine down on you.